Hi, I'm Maz, the founder of When, and we're here to talk about my fertility journey. Where should we start?
So I think we should start the very first day you came into my office when you were 33 and you had an AMH of 3.6 and you'd been told that you had low fertility and that you probably wouldn't be able to have a baby. I still remember it really well. You were so upset.
Yeah. So up until that point that I was sitting in Rachel's office, I'd had a really broken fertility journey. And if I really kind of rewind, I was 31 and I'd had my AMH tested. It was actually my mum who said, you know, you're single, you're in your early 30s. I've heard of this thing called an egg count test. I think you should go and have one. And so she'd prompted me to have the first test. So I went, down to a doctor. It wasn't my regular doctor. It wasn't a family GP. And I had that first AMH test and it came back. So I'm 31 and it came back at it was 7.8. Because this particular doctor wasn't my regular GP, there wasn't that follow-up, there wasn't that further conversation. And obviously they didn't understand my family planning goals, which were having a family was really very important to me. And kind of 2.5 years go past, I meet my now husband, Brett, and I remember that egg count test and I think, maybe I should have a look at that again and go and have that retested. And this test came back and it was much lower again. It was 3.6. So I'm now 33. My AMH is 3.6. And my GP at the time does tell me that that result means I'm going to have a very challenging time having a family, that, I might not have a family.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of misinformation out in the community, and Maz was really typical of young women with a low ovarian reserve, and I've seen so many women in her situation that they think that a low AMH means that they're going to have difficulty having a baby. Regardless of whether you've got a low or high ovarian reserve, if you've got a regular monthly menstrual cycle, as the vast majority of women do, you are releasing one egg each month. It's like the ovary is the bank of eggs, and if you just need to release one to have a baby, to conceive, it doesn't matter how many are in the bank. And so it was, I remember the relief in your eyes when I explained that concept to you.
Well, up until this point, I've gone away from my GP with that 3.6 result, this thought that I might not be able to have a family. And I think, as you've talked to me about, when someone says that to you, not only does it kind of break your heart, but you also really grab onto that and you think that's the truth. I think when it's so important to you, you do, you think that worst case.
Absolutely.
Yes, well, I take this result home and I tell, again, my now husband, was my fiance at the time, that, this result has come back and I don't think that we're going to be able to have a family. And, he was really wonderful about it and kind of said, no, we'll face, this challenge head on together. So we do, and we jump into Google and we go down the Google rabbit hole as many people do. And, we couldn't find the right information. Anyway, we find a really great journal article about low AMH. We find who's authored it and we email them. And, I found this email chain I was telling you yesterday, and I write to this specialist and I say, having a family is really important to me. And I've just found out I have low fertility. And of course, that's not what low AMH means.
Low AMH does not mean low fertility.
But this is what I thought, and I didn't know what it meant. And long story short, he says you need to see Dr. Rachel Rogers. This is Dr. Rachel Rogers. She is not only a wonderful specialist, she's a really great person, and she specialises in low AMH. So we proceed to call Dr. Rachel Rogers' office and are told there is, of course, a long waiting list because she is that good. And I beg and I cry. And that moment that we walk into Rachel's office is where our broken journey ends. And from there on in, it's really, really different. And for us, we know that there's so many people that don't have that access, and their journey might continue to be broken, or they have misinformation along the way. But the second we were sitting in your office and you said, that's not what low AMH means, I mean, it changed our whole life.
Yeah. I do see a lot of this, and you're right, it does break my heart. And I've had patients that have been given a low AMH. They've been given the wrong information. They'll get so anxious about it. They'll come to have their appointment with me. They'll walk in my room and I'll say hello, and they'll start crying. One of the messages I really want to get out there is, before you go and get really, really worried and upset about something, the dark places, as we call it, come and speak to someone about your individual situation, because there's a really good chance that we're going to be able to help you.
So we're in your office and Rach takes us through her plan. And that plan actually involves that our first child, that we would try to conceive naturally.
Yep.
But before we go and do that, I'm going to freeze my eggs, and we're going to preserve my options for second or third children.
Yeah. So one of the questions I usually ask my patients is not just, do you want to have a baby? Because the answer is almost inevitably yes. But how many children do you want to have? And it's a different conversation if it's one baby or if it's more than one baby. So I knew that Maz, being young, everything said she should be able to conceive naturally. But because she wanted to have potentially more than one child, I didn't know when she was going to become menopausal. And with a low AMH, there's that risk. It may not happen, which would be fabulous, but there's a risk of anyone with a really low ovarian reserve that they're going to have an earlier than average menopause. So what I said to her was, what we need to do is freeze eggs for you now and put them in the freezer, and then essentially forget that they're there. And as soon as we've got them in the freezer, you try and conceive naturally, because I think you'll be able to. And you did. The idea being is that if we get the first baby naturally, then we've got those eggs in the freezer for potentially baby number 2 or baby number 3.
So that was the plan really from the beginning. And then we dive into egg freezing together, and 3 rounds.
Yep.
And I think one thing that you don't necessarily understand is that you can, with that low AMH, you can kind of crawl through those rounds.
So if we do an egg freeze for someone with a low ovarian reserve, and say we get 3 eggs, and we do an egg freeze for someone with a higher ovarian reserve and we get 12 eggs, if we do 4 cycles for the woman with the low ovarian reserve, then we're going to build up to 12 eggs and put her in exactly the same position as a woman with a higher ovarian reserve. It's just a longer journey to get there.
Yeah. So we really got to the end of our journey with you, and we had, a great result. And we said, if I'd had this information sooner, I could have made better decisions and looked at, what my options were earlier. Yeah. And that's where when really came from.
Yeah. Doing an AMH when someone is younger, in their, late 20s, early 30s, it's probably going to be fine. But occasionally you're going to get someone who's got a really low ovarian reserve, and they're the people we want to pick out and help before it's too late. And certainly I've seen women in their late 20s, early 30s that are menopausal. It's uncommon, so don't freak out, but it certainly can happen.
So we got to the end of our fertility journey, and like we said, up until we met you, it was really, really broken. And then even after that, we've gone through multiple rounds of egg freezing, and there's the financial toll of that, the personal, the relationship toll, even just the toll on your body. And we really got to the end of that and said, if I'd been looking at this in my 20s, if I'd been looking at my AMH and proactively tracking it, would this have looked different? So we set out, first and foremost, to educate people, to give them access to fertility knowledge about their own bodies, and really, to make sure that no one, had to track the path I did.
Yeah, and I know that's been really important to you from the very first day you came up with the idea of when you never wanted women to go down the same horrible pathway that you did. You wanted them to feel supported all the way along. You wanted women to know about their bodies, so if there was a problem, we detected it early enough when it was treatable, when we could do something about it.
We really founded WHEN to help people start the fertility conversation sooner, to give them more options later.
Absolutely.